Well, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nathan Morris. I'm an attorney at Eisenberg, Cutt, Kendall, and Olson. With me is attorney Brian Weber at my left. We are honored to represent the Palacio-Carbajal family. We have several members of the family with us here today. Two family members, our brothers and sisters, Freddie Palacio-Carbajal and Karina Palacio-Carbajal. And they are brothers and sisters, as I mentioned. Bernardo's mother, Lucilla, who goes by Lucy, is here as well. And we also have Analia, who is Bernardo's niece. 7 years old? Okay, yes. All right, and then we have another family member, Karina, as well. The way that we will proceed here today is I will be reading a public statement for the family. After the statement, we will permit some questioning by members of the media and press. We ask, of course, that you be sensitive in your questions. All the questions relating to legal natures and legal inquiries will be addressed by the attorneys and not by the family members, and so we ask that you respect that distance. Today, the Salt Lake County District Attorney, Sim Gill, a publicly elected politician, has announced that no criminal charges will be filed against the Salt Lake City Police Department officers who took Bernardo's life on May 23, 2020. As a family and as a community, we are deeply disappointed and grieved. Mr. Gill's decision to support the police officers who shot Bernardo at least 34 times reveals a deeply ingrained devaluation of human life, especially minorities, and further erodes the public's trust in our system of justice. The DA's unwillingness to prosecute makes a mockery of the protesting public and contradicts the views of numerous other city and state officials who have described the killing as unlawful, genuinely disturbing and upsetting, and an all too familiar pattern. The DA has chosen, like so many national, state, and local public officials before him, to find justification in what he called bad law. As a family, we believe that the DA's decision not to act is a continuation of a system of oppression and control that is sadly being demonstrated throughout our country. The DA's decision not to act perpetuates an unfair system that has been supported and enabled by politicians who are unwilling to take a stand for equality under the law and to represent the interests of unheard and undervalued people in our communities. Contrary to Mr. Gill's public statement today, the language of Utah's deadly force law expressly authorizes the DA to prosecute the officers who shot Bernardo. Mr. Gill chose to ignore that language and took upon himself the decision to exonerate the officers at the expense of a fair judicial process, rather than permitting a jury of Bernardo's peers to decide the fate of the officers. He did so by speculating on multiple key questions and giving every benefit of the doubt to the officers. One of the most fundamental rights we have as Americans is due process when accused of a crime. Tragically, Bernardo was not afforded any due process when the Salt Lake City Police Department officers acted as judge, jury, and executioners. Bernardo, who never once threatened the police with force, was scared for his life and was running from authorities at 2 a.m. on empty streets where there was no risk of harm to the police or public. The officers had many opportunities to use less than deadly force, but chose not to. Even after shooting Bernardo 4 to 6 times from approximately 15 feet away before he fell, the two officers then completely emptied their clips, which contained 17 rounds each for a total of 34 bullets. That is approximately 25 to 30 bullets after Bernardo was on the ground. The police officers repeatedly pulled the trigger for approximately 9 seconds. Courts have consistently held that deadly force is impermissible when any threat of escape has been eliminated, such as when Bernardo was lying on the ground. The officer's unlawful, senseless, and deeply disturbing decision to continue shooting Bernardo cannot be permitted in our society, regardless of the wrongs a person is accused of. Mr. Gill has placed a stamp of approval on these appalling actions. We are grateful as a family to the numerous members of our community who have supported the family through this painful ordeal and who have called for justice and accountability. We ask them to continue to peacefully protest the injustices we heard announced by the DA today. As a family, we will not stop in our pursuit of justice for Bernardo through all means that are available to us. We call on the leaders of the Salt Lake City Police Department and other local authorities to continue their internal investigation and to hold these officers accountable. We demand that the Salt Lake City Police Department policies and trainings be changed so that tragedies like this do not happen again. We ask the legislature to take the promised collective, concrete steps to prevent further and future replays of this all too familiar pattern. Bernardo's death cannot be forgotten, and we pray that justice will be accomplished. Thank you. We will now open the floor to questions, if anybody has questions of the family members or attorneys.
So, Sim seemed to indicate at the press conference that he's just following state law. Where do you think the disconnect is? Do you think Sim could have found this unjustified, or do you think state law needs to change?
Brian, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, I'll do that. So, I mean, I think you all have seen the same video that we have all seen. Now, you may have seen it before today, but I think you've all seen it now today, and I think collectively you probably saw what we saw, which was somebody being shot in the back by the police running. Our objective here is to try and get some justice and accountability and change. He was failed, obviously, by the police who chose to kill him. He was failed by the district attorney's office this morning, who refused to prosecute in a circumstance which we believe justified prosecution, even under the standards described by the district attorney this morning. A case could have been made. Frankly, the press conference this morning sounded more like a defense criminal argument than it did a district attorney looking to protect the citizens of Salt Lake City and the surrounding areas. So our objective is, as a essentially last resort at this point, because the justice system on the criminal side has failed, our objective is now to work with the city, to work with the police department, and to bring civil legal action to try and bring some remedy to Bernardo's family.
So my follow-up question, why the family has attorneys? You are planning civil action in the near future?
Yes, we are. We've not filed a lawsuit yet. We will be doing so shortly.
Can you speak to qualified immunity and what, if any, role that could play in Utah and in the case?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and address that. The qualified immunity is something that the family has been disturbed about. There are numerous cases and questions throughout the country. We've seen those displayed more recently with George Floyd and others, where there is an argument that the police can be justified in using this force. Now, the distinction in this case clearly is the use of excessive force. And to circle back to the question as well previously about why there's the disconnect between Mr. Gill saying that he has to follow the law, there may be, certainly, we can understand and contemplate that there may be an argument relating to initial shootings. That's what legal systems are about. Due process requires that those issues be addressed. However, the fact that they used and used their guns multiple times after he was down and no longer presented a threat gives Mr. Gill the opportunity and the option and the right to prosecute these officers because the threat had been removed at that point. The use of lawful force is only justified where there is a threat, and in this instance, that threat was removed effectively after 4 to 6 bullets when he fell on the ground. Now, we vehemently disagree with Mr. Gill's characterization of what happened. He speculated every respect. You heard this morning where he said it's conceivable that he did this, or it's possible that he did that. Those are issues that are reserved for the legal system and the jury system, as opposed to a DA making a determination on his own.
Did any of the videos you watched earlier change your perception about everything that has happened with Bernardo?
The videos from today that we watched? We have seen those videos before, and we would also stress that there are numerous other videos that we are waiting for from other officers. One in particular that was not addressed until the question was raised by one of the media members: could there have been other force used, less lethal force? And it was only at that time, well, 45 minutes into the press conference, that Mr. Gill acknowledged that there was another officer who said, "Tase him, tase him, tase him," 3 times. And that, we believe, is a crucial aspect that was left out by Mr. Gill, because that shows a lack of training here, where one officer makes a concerted effort to say tase him, especially if the weapon is dropped, which it obviously was dropped by the videos that were shown today, whereas the other officers defaulted to lethal force, which is a real problem when it comes to training in our society, police departments and otherwise.
I mean, you could see the police, if you've seen the videos, you could see we're within mere moments of apprehending him. They'd closed the distance considerably. He'd struggled and fallen multiple times and was not that far away from them. The DA said something in the 15 to 20 foot range. I think it's more like 10 to 15, but it doesn't really matter. The simple fact of the matter is he never was a threat to the police. And to now go back and weeks and weeks later reconstruct a version of events in which he at the last second rolled over and was going to shoot them, we don't believe is going to play out. We believe that the video evidence, which we've seen today and before, clearly demonstrates someone that could have been apprehended with less than lethal force, and that the sheer amount of force used was unbelievably excessive. They shot all 34 of their bullets at him as he was running away from them.
We only take solace in the fact, I suppose, that there were only 17 rounds per gun. Otherwise, we don't know where this would have stopped. Question in the back?
Has there been any discussion about asking for an NCI Attorney General, any other review of what things like today?
Those are all considerations that we are looking into. We have been contacted by numerous other entities, including the ACLU and other organizations who are deeply interested in justice in this case and what is going on here. To answer your question directly, yes, we are considering those aspects. We believe that there will be an investigation, but as you heard Mr. Gill state today, there is an ongoing investigation internally by the police, and we hope they do the right thing there, where Mr. Gill did not come to that conclusion.
We had hoped that today would have been the opportunity for the district attorney to do what everyone hoped he would do, which is to serve justice. That has not happened, which now leaves us to pursue those other avenues, including the ones you mentioned.
Question, yes? In red, thank you.
When you're talking about justice, what does justice look like in this case?
It looks in part like what I said a moment ago, because the one person who can't tell you what happened that day is Bernardo. He can't tell you what his intent was, or what was conceivable or not conceivable in the minds of the district attorney or the police officers. He's dead. He can't tell you. All we can do at this point is try to seek justice. So you ask what that is. That involves seeking change within the police department itself, seeking any other remaining avenues we have against the individual officers. They won't be charged criminally by the DA, but there's certainly an opportunity for the police department and Salt Lake City to step up and do appropriate things. I know the city, I know you've heard the mayor say she was horrified and disgusted by this. I know you've heard a council member say it was unlawful to shoot this man. I'm hopeful that the city and the police department are interested in making some effective change. So that's one of our objectives, is change so it doesn't happen again. So somebody like Bernardo's mom and family aren't sitting in a press conference in a similar situation. So really institutional change from the bottom up, from the simplest police procedures all the way up to changes at the legislative level alluded to by Mr. Gill. If the law itself needs to be changed to give citizens more protection, that's also an objective of ours. We believe the law as written easily encompassed this as an unlawful shooting, and those officers should have been charged. That hasn't happened, so our objective now is to move forward and make sure that doesn't happen again.
And I'll just circle back and respond to your question further relating to justice, which is clearly this is such an unfortunate situation that me in my situation and where I'm standing in my life and Brian cannot comprehend what this family has gone through. And as we've sat with them through this press conference earlier this morning, to see the despair and disappointment on their faces is something that I don't want to relive. So when we talk about justice, justice is what can be appropriate for the family, for their feelings, for where they are at in their lives, as opposed to someone in any of our situations. I hope and pray that none of you have been faced with a situation like this family has. But that is certainly and absolutely something that no one should have to go through. So our desire in this lawsuit is not only to bring about justice for Bernardo, but to also bring about change so that other families don't have to face this situation, recognizing the situation that it is. And we invite you to ask those questions also of the family, if you have questions about what justice is. You had another question over here.
Yeah, so going back to the specific incident itself, when District Attorney Singo was describing it today, he was speaking about what he called two different episodes, right? They fired the first set, then they saw him turn around and what appeared to them of him grabbing a hold of the weapon and pointing it at the officers. That second round was when that took place. What do you have to say? Do you feel that that was all of it unjustified? Was the second episode unjustified? Were you specifically on that?
That's a very good question, because whether you look at it as one episode or two or multiple, break it down into whatever finer pieces you'd like, none of them were justified. I mean, his justification at the end was, for the reason they completely unloaded their guns into him on the ground helpless, was he said it wasn't inconceivable that he was rolling over with a gun. Well, that situation never would have arisen in the first place if you hadn't shot him at least a dozen times in the back already. So to us, it doesn't really matter how small a piece you break the segments down into from when they first come on scene until it's over. There was no reason to fire shot number 1, let alone shot number 34.
Mr. Gill also addressed the fact that that this gun was being picked up, and we don't want to shy away from that fact. That the gun was being picked up, that gave justification for them to believe this. Else, in Mr. Gill's mind or words, why would he continue to pick up the gun if not to use deadly force? And our retort to that is he had every opportunity to use deadly force, meaning Mr. Bernardo did, to turn his gun, but he chose not to. He continued to run away. His clear intention that day was to run away from the situation as opposed to using force that the police officers did. And we will remind you, and these items will come out later on, that there were at least 5 officers with their weapons trained on Bernardo as he was lying on the ground. So the justification that after that initial shooting, he's on the ground and he may have made motions that Mr. Gill interpreted and speculated was a gun, that to fire 20 to 30 times after that, when you have 5 officers trained on this individual to see what he would do, defies reason in our mind. Did you have a follow-up question? I think you had.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. There was another part where he talked about actually being impressed that the officers showed great restraint. They didn't fire the first time he tripped, not the second time, not until the third time when they confirmed visually that what he had was a weapon. What is your response to that?
As a corollary to that,
Under their training, just to specify, under their training, they even showed great restraint.
I don't think emptying 2 guns worth of clips into the back of somebody, a 22-year-old kid, is any form of restraint. But the simple fact of the matter is, every time he stumbled, they were getting closer. They were seconds away from being able to subdue him. Should he have been running? No. You know what you do to a suspect who runs? You apprehend them, you bring them in, you book them, you charge them, they go to trial. You don't kill them. You don't shoot him in the back, and certainly not every time he trips you're getting closer, you just get your hands on him. Or you, as one of the officers himself said, tase him. But you don't shoot him in the back and kill him.
Are we allowed to ask a question to the family if it's not legally related?
Yes, absolutely. And we encourage that to get their thoughts on how they reacted and responded.
And you guys were saying as you went into today and the meeting with the district attorney, you said he had every opportunity to do what you guys were hoping he would do. What was the reaction for you guys when he ruled that shooting is justified?
I felt angry, sad, disgusted that my brother's gone, and like it's just like they think it's okay. Like the way that they killed him, like it's not right.
Freddie, you have anything?
I just feel really angry, and sick to my stomach. I feel like they just get a pat on the back for what they did. And I don't agree with any of it.
Another question for you guys. You know, we have seen weeks of rallies and protests in support of Bernardo, whose mural is painted downtown. You saw all of the video. Going into this, did you have high hopes?
I sort of did think that he was going to do something, but then getting closer to it, seeing all the history that's happened here, I was like, no, he's not going to do it, so kind of disappointing.
But I do want to add, like, we're so grateful, we're thankful for the people that, like, you know, the protesters and everybody too, that has shown, like, so much support for us that we much have needed and still need. So we are so grateful for that.
Preguntita en español. ¿Cuál es su sentir, un mensaje a la comunidad hispana, su sentir de la decisión del fiscal general de Salt Lake el día de hoy? ¿Cómo se siente?
Me siento muy enojada. Eso no fue una decisión justa, porque mi hijo ya no está con nosotros, ya no lo miro entrar a la casa, ya no tengo vida, siento que no respiro. Ustedes no se pueden imaginar si les mataran a un hijo como mataron a mi hijo. No se puede ni siquiera imaginar lo que siente uno, no duerme uno. Mi casa se siente un silencio inmenso sin mi hijo, porque él era alegre, él jugaba conmigo, él siempre me hacía bromas, y ya no está con nosotros. Toda la gente lo quiere, lo ama, lo extraña. Sus sobrinos, el más chiquito de 3 años, le platican sus fotos que mira con él. Siento que me estoy muriendo, siento que me duelen mis huesos, todo, porque no miro a mi hijo conmigo, solo lo miro en las fotos, le hablo, le pido que me dé fuerzas para seguir por mis hijos y por mis nietos, porque yo amo a mis hijos, no tenemos familia aquí, nomás mis hijos y yo, y me falta mi hijo, el que estaba conmigo en casa en las noches. Estoy muy enojada con el señor Senguio. No es una respuesta correcta, no es una decisión correcta la que él tomó, y vamos a seguir luchando. Y aunque mi hijo no está aquí, él nos da el derecho de que sigamos luchando para que madres como yo no pierdan a sus hijos, como mataron a mi hijo. Esa fue una cobardía. Senguio debe saber que esto fue una cobardía de los policías, matarlo por la espalda. Parecía una guerra, no necesitaban tantos balazos, para eso existen las cortes y los jueces. Y agradezco a todas las personas que nos han apoyado, porque hemos tenido muchísimo apoyo. Aunque esto no me regresa a mi hijo, pero vamos a seguir luchando y vamos a pedir justicia por mi hijo y por muchas más personas que han muerto igual como mi hijo, y para que no pase más esto. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Si tienes otras preguntas, yo hablo español también. Podemos hablar luego. But for anyone who doesn't speak Spanish, I don't think you need to speak Spanish to hear what a mom just said about the loss of her son and what it means to her to have him not walk through the door anymore. He was 22 years old, and now he's gone. So Spanish or English, I think you get the pain that the family's feeling.
You know, she was saying she feels like the family's not respected, that her house is down silent. I feel like a lot of what the public has seen from that video is associated with a lot of negative connotations. Can you guys, on behalf of the family, explain to us what Bernardo was like?
He was always really playful, joke. He liked to joke around a lot. He loved to play with his niece and his little nephew. He's 3 years old. He'd always get home from work and play with them. He was teaching her how to draw. He loved to draw. When we wouldn't go to work, he'd sit in his room for hours in his little sketchbook and just draw and draw. Sit there for hours drawing beautiful paintings. One Christmas, I was like, what do you want? He said, just get me some colored pencils. Not the cheap ones, I want the good ones. And that's all he asked for, just colored pencils.
He was a very positive person. Like, no matter if we were going through something, he was very positive. He would always say, you know, everything's gonna be okay, you know, don't be sad. Things will get better. He was very comforting. He was very loyal. And yeah, no matter what, he would always try to like make us laugh.
He would always want to not. Mom was always scared of everything when she watched the news. We'd always try to protect her from that, have her not listen to all the stuff going on in the media. He'd like, just don't listen, Mom, it's okay, everything's gonna be fine, you know? He'd always things that she was sad about. She's like, don't be sad about it, you know, just be positive about everything. And he was the only one there at home with her.
And my mom's diabetic, so he would always tell her, like, you have to eat healthy, you have to not eat this. Like, he was always, like, looking out for her, like, making sure that she was, like, taking care of herself, her health.
She woke up, he likes to eat breakfast. You eat your breakfast, Mom, make sure you eat. He'd always be on top of it, get home from work and check on her, you know, did you take your meds, did you do this? And now she doesn't have that. And me, every day, I would pick him up for work. Every single day, I would take him. Hey, bro, I'm on my way. Are you ready? Pick him up. We go to work. We eat lunch together. Every single day. Weekends, we work together. During the week, we work together. And now I don't even know how I'm going to deal with this, but I want to be strong, because I know he wouldn't want me to be like this. He didn't like us to be sad. So I'm going to try to be strong for him, because I know that's what he would want.
Other questions?
How do you make sense of what happened that evening? Did you know that he wasn't home? I mean, was he just at the wrong place at the wrong time? How do you process those moments leading up to that?
You don't have to answer if you can't, so don't worry about it.
Yes, question?
Heard from the attorneys about what justice looks like to them. Can you guys speak a little bit to what you'd like to see, what justice means to you guys?
We would like there to be like consequences for the officers that killed my brother. We want them to face consequences. There needs to be accountability. That's what we would like.
You know, we've seen a lot of people, like I was mentioning earlier, dropping off flowers, the murals. Do you hope to continue to see that type of support?
Yeah.
It's not being used to see that.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful that, you know, people are taking the time, even like complete strangers, like that they're, you know, taking the time out of their day to like do this. Like I said, it means like a lot to us, and we're very grateful.
guys, as a family, go on from here? I know we've seen your family at protests, we've seen you guys out there calling for justice for your son, your brother, your, and you want this, you don't want this to happen to other families. Where do you guys go from here in your fight?
Well, we just want to do whatever we can, whatever we're able to do to make sure that justice is served for Bernardo. Just whatever possible, like we're not going to give up.
Any other questions?
I have
Thank
a
you.
question
Yes.
for you guys. What was there like anything? You mentioned a couple of things, but what specific from the district attorney's press conference really stood out to you as, you know, something that you have an issue with and that you're going to fight in your case?
Well, Brian mentioned earlier that the public justice system, particularly the district attorney, is a representative of the people of Salt Lake County. What we heard today was a representative of the police department, what it sounded like to us. And in particular, that every benefit of the doubt, as was mentioned in the statement earlier, was given to the police officers. That every speculative issue, every question that was unanswered, was answered in favor of the police by Mr. Gill, as opposed to allowing the justice system to work. Now, we understand, and we mentioned the due process aspect of this case, and of every case. That's a fundamental right. But the idea of a district attorney making the decision unilaterally and anticipating defenses that could be raised by the police officers and doing so based on speculation, to us seems to be a complete miscarriage of justice, where a district attorney should lay the facts out and let the system and the jury decide the fate of those individual officers. So particularly that is the area that was most disturbing to us as we listened to the press conference this morning. Brian may have a...
Just an opportunity for justice taken away. It's our position that he, as a public servant, should have at least filed the charges. Whether at the end of the day they go to trial and are acquitted, that's for another day. But should the citizens of the state of Utah be entitled to a jury trial of these officers? Yes, and we felt that was taken from them today.
Now, one other aspect here, and that was distressing and disturbing for the family and for ourselves, was a comment by Mr. Gill at the end saying that they were going to make recommendations to the legislature to try and change the law. And in the press recently, there's a comment that was referenced by Mr. Gill, who stated that after this is over, I'm going to make efforts to try and make things right. Our disappointment today, and the family's disappointment, is that history had its eye on Mr. Gill, and he did not step up and do his duty under the law. He took the easy road. He took the road that was taken many, many times, countless times, by both Mr. Gill as well as other public officials who have chosen not to prosecute these very situations. And so when he had that opportunity to do something, he shirked from that responsibility. And so to come back and say after the fact, I'll go ahead and do this after. How many times have we heard that throughout history, that people have a chance to do the right thing and they choose not to, when the opportunity is presented, and say, oh, it's the law or it's this, when every opportunity was presented to him to prosecute these officers and to allow due process to take place and the jury system to work.
I have one more question for the family. Karina, you were saying we're not going to stop. What would you say to the general public, to people who may be losing interest for whatever reason? What would you say to people to make them understand why it's so important for you guys to keep driving this forward?
I would say, if it was your brother or your son, would you stop? Would you just give up? If it was somebody that was close to you, like, would you just give up? And that's what I would say.
What has this process been like for your family?
It's a complete nightmare. It's so painful to just watch my mom, my brother, my niece, my nephew. It's just, I can't even describe it.
Freddie, you want to grab the photo of Bernardo so people can get a good look at who Bernardo was?
Pull it down a little bit so that you see. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for your time today. There will be opportunities later on as we continue to develop this case for questioning and for individual interviews. We'll consider those on case-by-case basis and depending on the situation.
I have one very last question.
Okay.
There's been concerns that Bernardo said, "I don't want to die." Should that have some sort of weight in the decision that the officers make at that moment, determining whether there is a verifiable threat there if he's sounding like he's raising the flag?
I was curious to hear no mention of that statement made today, which is clearly a statement you hear on audio. To us, that's a signal that he does not want to die. I mean, he's not going to pull a gun, turn around and shoot at the police. He just wants to get away. He's in trouble and he knows it. He wants to get away. He doesn't want to die. What's the best way to make sure you do die is to point the gun at him, which he never did. So I think it is important.
And I mentioned earlier the discussion about the justice and what that means and how it's different from me as opposed to someone in the situation of a family or others who have had difficult times through life. And as Bernardo is running, we have to keep that in mind, that Nate Morris running from the police is different than Bernardo Palacios. The fear that goes into that is much different. The analysis in their minds, we saw situations with George Floyd, with multiple other people in the country that have tried to do the compliant thing and it hasn't turned out well for them. We can't discount that pain that those individuals have gone through. And I don't presume to put myself into Bernardo's position or into anyone's position who is in that situation because I haven't felt what they felt. And I think that's an important consideration both in this case and elsewhere in this country.